for a police investigation. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, anti-clockwise queues continue for about an hour into the roadworks near 6 at Godstone, back to 9 at Leatherhead. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the final week to see how you can win a whopping £20,000 cash. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. You've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey, once again. We've got a jam-packed show for you. We're going to bring you news of yet another defection from Labour, from Tories to Labour. It would be good if it was the other way around. We're also going to catch you up on day 8 of the campaign trail. Is it only day 8? Good God, we've got a long run to go until July the 4th. We're going to be talking about Reform's idea of taxing businesses that use migrants. I'm going to be discussing that with Richard Tice in just a moment. And let's ask ourselves this question. Are the left in danger of eating themselves over the Diane Abbott fiasco? But first, here's the news with Polly Middlehurst. Camilla, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is, as you've been hearing, Mark Logan, who represented Bolton North East for the Conservatives, is reportedly leaving the party. He's told media outlets the Conservatives are now unrecognisable, his word, and he's urging people to support Labour instead. It's the third defection by a Tory to Labour in just over a month. He told the BBC his application to join Labour was going in today. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's warning that Labour's net zero policies will hurt Britain's economy. Touring a factory in Buckinghamshire today, Rishi Sunak acknowledged that recent years had been tough, but he says Labour's plan to achieve net zero is too costly.
I've been very clear that we need to get there in a different way to what had been proposed previously. And that means we need to be more serious, hard-headed and pragmatic about it, because there are a couple of things that I want to prioritise. I want to prioritise our country's energy security. That we've seen in the last couple of years what's happened, right, when we're held hostage by dictators like Putin. We can't have that happen. So that's why I'm supportive of energy coming out of the North Sea. We're going to need it for decades to come. We're better off getting it here at home. It's good for our economy, good for our jobs, good for our energy security. That's something that the Labour Party opposes.
Rishi Sunak. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says he's standing by Wales's First Minister, Vaughan Gething, as Labour's campaign arrived in Wales today. Sir Keir thanked Mr Gething for his leadership and said he was looking forward to a new partnership with the First Minister if Labour wins power. Sir Keir says he's proud of Labour's record in Wales and said Mr Gething, who's facing a vote of no confidence next week, is doing a very good job. Meanwhile, Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, says she doesn't see any reason why Diane Abbott can't stand as an MP with the party at the general election. According to reports in The Guardian, Angela Rayner believes Miss Abbott hasn't been treated fairly or appropriately. The veteran MP had the Labour whip restored this week after a long suspension. She's accused Sir Keir Starmer of culling the party's left wing. Sir Keir says he wants the highest quality candidates and has described Miss Abbott as a trailblazer. The Green Party set out its vision to tackle the cost of living, improve housing and treat Britain's polluted waterways today in its campaign launch. Co-leader Carla Denyer told the event in Bristol this afternoon that Labour had backtracked on its green investments and that the Greens' role in the new Parliament would be critical. Recent polls put the party at 6% and it's hoping to elect 4 MPs at the general election. Businesses hiring foreign workers should be subject to an employer immigration tax, according to the Reform Party. Their leader, Richard Tice, said today the new levy would help what he called a deadly addiction to cheap overseas labour. Joined by the party's honorary president, Nigel Farage, they claim that mass migration had driven down wages for British citizens.
I think for too many people, work doesn't pay. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to overcome this addiction. If you want to bring in people from overseas, then there's a price to that. Because this great country of ours, this incredible nation, we've all paid for it over decades and decades. So it's not unreasonable to expect you to chip in a bit.
Richard Tice. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Polly. Right, let's just bring you up to date on this Mark Logan news, because he has now defected. He was the former Conservative Member of Parliament for Bolton North East. He's been doing that job for 5 years, but he's got a majority of just 378, which does make this all a little suspicious. Anyway, he said that the Conservative Party is unrecognisable to the party he joined in 2019. He is now joining the Labour Party, but is standing down at the next election. So it's a little bit of a Natalie Elphicke situation once more. Who knows what's been promised? I mean, on one hand, the Labour Party want to abolish the House of Lords, but I get the impression that there may have been some pledges to ennoble people along the way, should they form the next government. Let's then catch up as well on, as I say, it's day 8 of the campaign. The PM has been in Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire, discussing tax, apologising for Partygate and talking about, you guessed it, net zero.
Now, I've been very clear that we need to get there in a different way to what had been proposed previously. And that means we need to be more serious, hard-headed and pragmatic about it, because there are a couple of things that I want to prioritise. I want to prioritise our country's energy security. That we've seen in the last couple of years what's happened, right, when we're held hostage by dictators like Putin. We can't have that happen. So that's why I'm supportive of energy coming out of the North Sea. We're going to need it for decades to come. We're better off getting it here at home. It's good for our economy, good for our jobs, good for our energy security. That's something that the Labour Party opposes.
After Diane Abbott vowed to stand in Hackney North by any means possible, the Labour leader was in Wales.
So 6 steps, 1 card, make sure you've got yours. We're going to take this to every single doorstep across Wales to make our case for a changed future. 1 card, 6 steps. Wales and Westminster working together, turning the page, a change election, where we can stop the chaos and division, put an end to it. We can turn the page and rebuild Wales and the United Kingdom together, working together for the future. That's the way forward. That's the choice. Vote Labour. Thank you so much.
Can I just say, it's not actually a card. It's not a pledge card like Tony Blair's. It's a leaflet. I've seen it. It's like an accordion leaflet, just to be pedantic. Anyway, how about the Liberal Democrats? After larking about in Lake Windermere and riding a bicycle down a hill, Ed Davey launched himself down a slip and slide in Somerset. There we are. And he also made a pledge, more seriously, on mental health.
Today, the Liberal Democrats have got a really important message on mental health, our children's mental health. And my colleagues Munira Wilson and Daisy Cooper have been out there. I'm talking to you now about our policy is to get a qualified mental health professional in every school, in our primary schools and our secondary schools. And only the Liberal Democrats are arguing for that with a costed programme. It's so important. Our children's mental health has never been in such a crisis. Huge waiting lists for help. And it's not just about their health now, it's how it impacts their whole future.
Well, before I bring in my superstar political panel, I'm asking you a really simple question tonight. We're just over a week into the campaign. Who do you think's faring the best? Who do you think's having a good campaign? Who do you think isn't having a great campaign? Has Ed Davies larking about made you think about voting for the Liberal Democrats or never voting for them before? Let me know. So you can email me on farage@gbnews.com or X with the hashtag Farage on GB News. Couldn't be simpler, and I look forward to hearing from you. Joining me now to discuss the day's events is political journalist and commentator Theo Usherwood and a senior reporter at the newspaper, Benjamin Butterworth. Theo, Benjamin, lovely to see you. Why don't I put the audience question to you both? Theo, first of all, who do you think's having the best campaign?
So far, Labour. There was a wobble yesterday.
Interesting.
There was a wobble yesterday, but if you're talking about the 8 days as a whole, Labour has had a better campaign so far. Interestingly, I think actually Rishi Sunak has tightened it up a bit. If you go back to the very beginning of the campaign, the deluge, the gaffe about talking about football to the Welsh, who of course haven't qualified for the Euros.
Yeah.
And then he had that sort of firewall of a day on Saturday where he tried to get his top team around to try and make things better. And that's worked to an extent, hasn't it? Because we haven't seen the same level of gaffes, we haven't seen the same mistakes. And of course, Labour in the last couple of days has been inundated with questions and whether Diane Abbott's going to stand as a Labour MP or she's going to stand as an independent. And Keir Starmer seems to have backtracked on that. So at the moment, apart from one poll which puts the lead down, Labour's lead down to 12 points, it's actually remaining, the polls so far are actually remaining relatively divergent, somewhere with the 20,
well,
20
to be fair, we're going to talk about both polling and this idea of the left eating itself a little later in the show. Benjamin, do you agree with that analysis? Because actually, I think because of the whole furore around Diane Abbott, that Keir Starmer's been quite anonymous in this campaign so far.
Yeah, I don't think either of them have really landed any blows. I think the Tory campaign is probably more agile. The fact that they got several days of people talking about national service, it looks like if you break the polling down, there's evidence that natural Conservative voters at the last election rather liked it, so it's probably helping them against reform. And I think what the Tories have to do is to get people to not talk about the last 5 or 14 years. And I think they've done that quite effectively. They've set out a number of things, the VAT pledge, the national service announcement, that have got people moving on. And it's a pretty low bar, but I think that's helpful for them. What I would say is that, you know, Labour had its NHS day, which is absolutely essential to it winning voters over, and Wes Streeting is probably its best shadow cabinet performer, and that was all drowned out by the Diane Abbott row. But I think to some extent that is the kind of argument that people in studios like this and people that love to debate politics will get really invested in. But I suspect Keir Starmer isn't too worried about that, because the message that a lot of voters are hearing are, oh, we don't really want people like Corbyn and probably not Diane Abbott and some of these other lefties. You know, the BBC is leading with Keir Starmer's purge of the left. I think they're probably quite pleased about headlines like that.
Maybe that does appeal to righties. Admittedly, a lot of Telegraph readers sort of writing in and saying that they don't think Abbott has a place in the party because she's like Corbyn, and therefore that does position Starmer in a more moderate place.
Yes, it does, but I completely agree with what Benjamin has said in terms of what the public and voters are seeing out there. They're saying, well, actually, and I think even there's been some suggestion from Labour sources that actually even Diane Abbott kept on coming up on the doorstep because people were saying, is this part of your past? You still got this issue with the MPs on the left of the party still being in the party. What are you doing in effect? So I think in that respect it will play quite well for Keir Starmer if Diane Abbott doesn't eventually stand as a Labour MP and she stands as an independent with voters that he's trying to win over. However, think about the Labour Party conference coming up in September, October after this election. And it's that caucus of Labour members who are going out there day after day for the next 5 and a bit weeks, 6 weeks, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets. For them, somebody like Diane Abbott is a real icon. And Keir Starmer needs to keep them motivated. The other thing I'd say is that leaders can take a bullish attitude to purging the party. We saw what Boris Johnson did with the Remainers as he tried to get Brexit over the line. We can see what Theresa May did before she called that general election. And you can feel really powerful and strong. But on the way down, you need your friends.
Yes.
And whatever victory Keir Starmer secures, there are going to be some bumps, and he may not
Benjamin,
win, of
that's the point, isn't it? Because this decision to withdraw Faiza Shaheen from Chingford and Woodford Green, I mean, I covered that area because Ian Duncan Smith, the Tory candidate, former Tory leader, got a lot of abuse, and there was a lot of activist activity in 2019, and things were posted through the letterbox of his campaign office, and graffiti was daubed on the wall. And I think the point is that those Labour activists who were really behind somebody who was basically a Corbynista candidate aren't necessarily going to go out campaigning with the same rigour if they get somebody who resembles, Labour's Darren Jones, who's much more of a moderate on the economy, for instance, right?
I suspect the Starmer team won't lose much sleep over, at most a few hundred Corbynistas not going door-knocking who previously would. I suspect they'd be quite pleased about that. And I actually think what's interesting here is that, first of all, as you mentioned, when Boris Johnson took the whip from Ken Clarke, an equally famous politician, well, it had no impact on the election. People didn't have a problem with that. But actually, you've had a real problem in politics under both Corbyn and Boris Johnson, where you've had a lot of candidates selected that just weren't up to the job. They were ideological in a way that wasn't constructive. They weren't sufficiently vetted properly. They said crazy things. They weren't loyal to the party.
Can we be confident that that won't be repeated? Well, I'll speak to Richard Tyson in a minute. He's got to select loads of candidates. I think the Conservatives have still got another 170 to select. Labour, this election has caught everyone off guard. We know as journalists that at some point over the next 4-5 weeks, we're going to have candidates dropping like flies because somebody somewhere is going to pore over their social media profile and find out that they've said some pretty stupid things in the past.
Yeah, yes.
On all sides.
But that's why I think actually Labour is doing the right thing, probably for the country, but also politically the right thing, because it's having this row now. It's being pretty rigorous, pretty ruthless, and I think that's going to set them up in better stead for the final few weeks when they can't drop the candidate, but also after an election.
I
think also, though, that Labour, it's much easier to recruit good candidates, because they feel like a party going into government.
Yes.
Whereas you've actually got to, for many Tories, they've got to select, in effect, paper candidates.
Can't even keep Michael Gove on the slate.
So that's more problematic for them, more of a challenge.
Shall we talk about the Liberal Democrats? What's Sir Ed Davey doing? He's larking about. He faced accusations today on the campaign trail in Somerset, where he is making a serious point about mental health, for being unserious in this campaign. We've had the Lake Windermere thing, riding bikes down hills, slip and slides. Theo?
He just needs attention. He's just desperate for attention.
Right, and that's what it's about.
We've seen this in recent years, ever since 2010. Going into Nick Clegg suffering that huge defeat when he was leader of the Liberal Democrats in 2015, and you see the squeeze, because we have more of a presidential style politics now, and voters are not stupid. They worked out that either one of two men is going to be Prime Minister. It's either going to be Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, and that puts the squeeze on. Interestingly, I don't think it's Lib Dems so interesting to watch. Just on the Labour question, I think it's the Greens. They launched their campaign today, and I think, are they going to become a sort of a way for core Labour supporters, voters, to vent their frustration? Watch out to what happens for Greens in the next few weeks.
Astonishing polling today, Benjamin, suggesting that the Greens are ahead of Tories in the under 50s, according to YouGov. That's nuts. That's a threat to the Labour vote, isn't it? There's no doubt about it. You've got George Galloway, you've got the Greens, you've got the potential for independent candidates like Jeremy Corbyn sucking up votes on the left.
Yeah, I think, the Gaza issue has been a big push of people towards the Green Party, and I don't know whether that will last, but certainly it's going to be a problem at this election. I think in terms of the Lib Dems, Theo's absolutely right, that they just need attention, which is rather odd, because they probably will be the story of this election. They may well gain 15, 20 seats. They may well be the party that takes out some of the cabinet ministers like Jeremy Hunt. And I think the fact is that the Lib Dems, if you look at the polling when they do well when people don't know what they stand for, when they can just be the local candidate and people project onto them what they would like. So the idea that we're seeing the Lib Dem leader, who I think only 13% of people know who the Lib Dem leader is in the first place, but that it's not controversial politics on divisive policies, is probably an ideal scenario for them.
Can I say something a bit controversial? Although, to be fair, Nigel said it on this show. Is this just a giant bore-off between two pretty uncharismatic, personality-free zones?
I think the main event of the year is going to be Biden versus Trump. And before the election was called, and I was just speaking to friends in Whitehall, especially working across Whitehall in different departments, they see the big hop being trust to Sunak in terms of going from somebody who's quite out there to somebody sensible. And now we're going from somebody sensible, if Labour win, in Rishi Sunak, to somebody more just as sensible in Keir Starmer. And that's how the Whitehall machine would view it.
But as the Tories are arguing, more of a security risk. I mean, Benjamin, actually, in this kind of man in white shirt versus man in white shirt, you know, not really big personalities like Johnson and Farage and others, when you're going head-to-head like that and you are making it a very presidential blue versus red, if Sunak can land this point that because of his association with Jeremy Corbyn and because of Lammy's statements on Trump and all the rest of it, that he might be sensible but he isn't safe, maybe Sunak does manage to control the narrative in that regard. OK, they're both a bit boring, but stick with what you know, because actually inflation's come down and this bloke used to be an investment banker and Keir Starmer never expected to be in this position, did he? He thought it was going to be Neil Kinnock for the next 10 years.
I think there's an irony in all this. Sunak is trying to present himself as the safe choice, and yet he comes on the back of years of utter chaos that pretty much everyone agrees felt anything but safe government. And meanwhile, Starmer is trying to say that he's the moderate, he's not the lefty, but he only got there by being part of an incredibly radical and left-wing Labour Party. So they're both trying to make arguments that are the reverse of how they got their jobs. But what I would say is that I suspect the fact they're both boring isn't their biggest problem, because people are really tired of the noise of politics, of the characters of people like Boris Johnson, who some fell in love with, then fell out of love with. And I actually think that Keir Starmer is the luckiest man in politics, because he is boring and people are willing to accept that. And the only person more boring than him is probably Rishi Sunak.
Agree with that, Theo? Very briefly?
Yeah, I think Keir Starmer, if people are bored of politics and they want less politics, Keir Starmer's cottoned onto this, hasn't he? And he said, I want a politics that treads more lightly on people's lives. So I think he recognises that people are kind of had enough, and if they want to switch off, well, I'll be the safe option to switch off to. You can leave, if you like, you can leave the telly on and it's just going to play in the background and it's not going to offend anyone. And Starmer's well attuned to that.
Theo Usherwood, Benjamin Butterworth. Great debate. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining me in the studio this evening. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Reform leader Richard Tice about their migrant tax plan. Don't go anywhere.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant or anything sort of like that, in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, you know, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to me to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, you know, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
Well, that has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, times change, you've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. I'm going to speak to Richard Tice in just a moment. He's in the studio sitting next to me about Reform's plan for a migrant tax. But first of all, let's go over what you thought when I asked you the question, who's winning the campaign so far? Steve says Rishi has talked more sense than any others. Interesting. Karen Ann says Nigel and Richard are rocking the campaign trail like a breath of fresh air. Mr. Tice, you'll be delighted to hear that. Another viewer says Labour are performing very well, although it isn't hard when they are against the Tories. Might be a good point. Nikki says the Conservatives have already won. Labour are tearing themselves apart. Better the devil you know. I think that might be wishful thinking, Nikki, when you look at the polls. But do you know what? A week's a long time in politics, so a month's even longer. Another viewer says of the Lib Dems, Ed seems to be having a great time. Indeed, he does on his slip and slide. Right, well, let's get stuck into Reform's policy announcement today on an immigration tax. I know we've got Richard in the studio, but let's hear him as he launched it earlier today.
The British economy, our great economy, it has a deadly, deadly addiction. That's the harsh truth. It's the drug of cheap overseas labour. And the cure is an employer immigration tax. So what we need to do is we need to incentivise business to say, actually, if you want to employ people from overseas, that's fine, but you've got to pay a price for it.
Well, the man himself joins me now in the Westminster studio. Nice to see you, Richard.
Good to see you
We're putting
too.
in the hours, aren't we, you and me?
Absolutely, it's got to be done. We're on the campaign trail. It's great fun.
Make hay while the sun shines.
A little bit of sun, a little bit of rain.
Right.
But this was a really important announcement.
Mm.
And you might say it's a surprise to be thinking of something where you actually need to raise tax.
Yes.
But it's really important. As you saw from the clip there, the truth is that the business community have become addicted to cheap overseas labour like a drug, and there's no contribution. It's unfair on British workers because the cost of housing, the cost of our infrastructure, which we've all paid for as taxpayers for decades, and yet what actually mass immigration, it's basic supply and demand, it depresses wages. It suppresses wages for British people, and that's what we're seeing. And that's the reason why we've had almost zero real wage growth for 15 years, and why we're in the longest recession per person, which is what really matters, over the last 2 years, because of mass immigration. There is a direct link, and yet business don't need to pay for training, for example, and all of these things. So we're saying to business, we're saying, look, the choice is yours, but you have to recognise that part of your responsibility to our community and our society is to train up and progress and pay the right wage for British workers.
Let's delve a bit more into some of the detail, because there's a few aspects to this policy that aren't clear to me. So I do think that you're open to the attack line that you're now taxing business more, not less, and you have been banging on about bringing corporation tax down, so that seems slightly counterintuitive to me. I mean, you're actually taxing businesses more now. That's the proposal.
That's a proposal, and if business didn't change their current behaviour, then that would generate additional, over an electoral cycle, about 20 million, but that would then be invested in apprenticeships and training for young people. But businesses have the choice. So we're saying to business, we think that you should do more for young British people who are currently trapped on that cycle of do I work, don't I work on benefits.
There's plenty of businesses that put adverts in where they need to in recruitment agencies and the local press and all the rest of it, and they can't get the British workers because they don't want to do certain kinds of jobs.
I don't accept that, because the reality is that we know it worked in the 80s and 90s before mass immigration. What's happened is that businesses have got away with paying lower wages, and it's very simple, basic economics. If you can't find the labour, you've either got to offer a higher price or you invest in capital equipment to improve the productivity to replace the labour. That's what's happened for 200 years until mass immigration came in the last 20, 25 years.
But if you're charging businesses more tax on those migrant workers, then you could arguably say that they'll have less money to pay on wages in general to employ British workers.
No, what history shows is actually, if they can't afford it, they'll invest in capital equipment, they'll improve productivity. We've got a productivity crisis, and all the experts are puzzling, scratching their noses, saying, how does this work?
How do you judge how you identify the worker being a migrant? Are you saying that they...
Non-British passport holders.
Yeah, but do you realise that 8 million people in the UK don't have a British passport?
Well, there's about 4.4 million foreign nationals in work, according to the ONS, so that's...
I know, but there's quite a surprisingly large proportion of working adults in this country that don't actually have a passport because they don't travel. So how would you deal with those?
Look, that's what we're looking at. It's for business to come back and say, have you looked at this?
Why is it for business to come back and give the details of your proposal?
Because that's what we put forward a proposal, and then business say, we understand what you're trying to do. It does work here, but it doesn't work there. We're saying, for example, right, there would be an exemption for healthcare, of course, and social care.
Because
that's sensible.
But equally, settings have got a huge number of foreign
absolutely,
workers.
and that's great. So that's why we've got that exemption, and also an exemption for small businesses, 5 people and below.
But you say 5 people and below. I mean, most businesses, one of the employees is usually the director. Maybe there's also the secretary. So that takes 2 out. You're not talking about small businesses, really. You're talking about micro businesses being exempt.
But that's
how
growth starts.
Hang on a minute, though. You're disincentivising people to grow their businesses beyond 5 with more migrant workers.
No, it's completely opposite. We're incentivising people to be ambitious, to be entrepreneurial.
But you're saying if you employ too many foreign workers, then we're going to tax you more. So people will think, my goodness me, right, let's just keep our employee count down, and therefore you're not growing the business. In fact, you're doing the complete opposite.
They've got a choice, and that's a great thing. That's how markets work. You have a choice. Do you want to pay more because there's a brilliant person over there that I want to pay, in which case I'll pay a bit more, or actually I want to employ British workers, young people, train them up, get some loyalty, grow the business that way. That's how it used to work.
Say a business has 5 migrant workers and a 6th comes in. Are you taxing the business on the basis of all of those workers, 6 of them, or just the extra one?
It'd be just the extra one.
Right. Let's bring Rocco Forte, Sir Rocco Forte, to give him his precise name, who's based in Rome. He's the chairman of Rocco Forte Hotels, where he's got a hotel or 2. And he joins us now. Sir Rocco, really intrigued to hear your reaction to this story, indeed this proposal, because I know I've interviewed you many times in the past. You know, you've got a large foreign workforce. There's a lot of people working in hospitality in the UK who don't have a British passport, Rocco.
Yes, indeed. And I like, of course, a lot of what Reform's approach is to dealing with the economy and the problems of this country. But I think this is the most crazy thing I've ever heard. And it's nothing to do with businesses. It's government not controlling immigration. And clearly it's a policy of the current government to allow 2.5 million people to come into this country over the last 2 years, when they have complete control of their borders. They can do anything, we can do anything we like with our borders, and we can exclude people from coming here. Immigration itself is not a bad thing. It's the right kind of immigration that we want, not the wrong kind. And what we've seen in the last 2 years, completely the wrong kind of immigration. 2.5 million people coming in and 1 million leaving the country as well. And they're leaving because a lot of them are leaving because conditions in this country are not very attractive to them at the moment because of government policy. And the job vacancies have not improved with all these people that have come in. I have 2 hotels in the UK, Brown's in London and the Balmoral in Edinburgh. Brown's in London, 60% of the people who work there are not English. They don't have English passports. They're all people who stayed after Brexit and have pre-settled or settled status. So am I going to be taxed for employing those people? In Edinburgh, it's 40% of the workforce is British. 40% is British. 60%. No, sorry, 47%.
No, I know what you're
British.
saying. 40% is British and 60 isn't.
Yes. These I have very good training schemes, development schemes. I go to all the English hotel schools and training colleges. We advertise for labour. We employ the best people to do the jobs. The wages we pay are well above minimum wages. They're not wages on the breadline. And people who are foreign workers we employ are living in this country and have to afford to be able to live in this country. So we're paying very good wages.
OK,
so
let me put all this to Richard, Sirocco. Let me put this to Richard, because you basically lambasted this as a crazy idea, and you've made, I think, the pretty valid point that why are you penalising businesses when it's a governmental responsibility to control migration and to make sure that we import skilled workers, not unskilled? I mean, you would be saddling Sirocco Forte, who's somebody who has flirted with the idea, by the way, of switching allegiance from the Tories, who he was once a donor for, to Reform. You'd be taxing him to the hilt.
Well, the 2 points that Rocco quite rightly makes there. The first is that on government immigration policy, yes, we've got mass immigration over the last couple of years, which is a complete disaster, and it's been too low skilled. So I agree with him on that. But the other point is, look, we've got over 9 million economically inactive people in the United Kingdom, and we've got to get those people back into work. We've got to train up and skill up and incentivise and motivate our own people. So what we're doing is giving businesses the choice. If the business wants to continue employing, wants to employ people that it's the right people, whether it's in hospitality or whatever, then that's their choice. But there has to be a cost. There's a recognition of a cost of bringing people from overseas to the UK, and it does, without question, have a depressing effect on local wages, and that's what history shows. So, I understand Rocco's point there, but the reality is the current system is failing everybody.
So, Rocco, briefly, is this now going to affect the way you cast your vote on July the 4th?
I haven't decided how I'm going to cast my vote on July the 4th, but you talk about productivity. Productivity is just as bad in continental Europe as it is in the UK. The worst level of productivity is found in government departments, much worse than anything in industry. That's got nothing to do with foreign workers. And in Europe, it's nothing to do. It's to do with restrictions on restrictions on businesses and the way businesses are controlled. And also it's to do with the welfare system and the tax that you pay, the marginal tax you pay if you go back into work. There's also post-COVID syndrome where people have decided that perhaps they don't want to work after all. And I don't think it's a question. I don't go out to India to recruit people to come and work for my business. I'm not actively involved in recruiting people from overseas. I'm employing people who apply to me in this country. And I'm taking on the best people to do the jobs. It's a service industry. You can't invest in machinery to employ less people. Actually, you need more people to give better service. It's about the number of people you have on the job. In luxury hotels, you've got to employ more people. I'm not going to put in machinery to serve Richard Tice. He wouldn't come into my hotels if I did.
Perish the thought. Sirocco Forte and Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Well, coming up next, we're going to be talking about why the Tories aren't moving the polling dial. Rishi Sunak's working hard. Look at him there. He's standing in front of a digger, talking about net zero, the economy, tax and Partygate, and yet the polls aren't moving. We're going to analyse why that is in just a moment.
Hello, mixed fortunes in our weather as we head through Friday. Best of the dry, fine weather towards the north and the west, but more cloud across eastern England with some showers and still feeling warm though in that sunshine. If we look at the pressure pattern then, you can see this area of high pressure. It's trying to build in across the UK, so settling things down towards the north and the west. But further east, close to that area of low pressure, more cloud and some rain here. So through Thursday and evening and overnight, we do hang on to more cloud down the eastern parts of England, like I said, with some further showery outbreaks of rain spreading their way southwards and some quite brisk winds here once again. Further towards the north and the west, though, drier, clearer, and not too cold overnight, so we hang on to still that breeze. So temperatures not dropping below 10 to 12 degrees in towns and cities. As we start Friday morning then, we get off to a pretty fine start across parts of Wales and southwest England. Some cloud around to start the morning, but also some sunshine. But then we run into that thicker cloud across central and eastern parts of England, with some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Lincolnshire, East Anglia, South East England through the morning. So quite a wet start to the day here. But a fine picture across Northern Ireland, much of Northern England and Scotland. Lots of sunshine to start the day. Just a few showers across the very far north and the west of Scotland. And it's more of the same really as we head through the rest of Friday. Always the thickest of the clouds across central and eastern parts of England, with further showery outbreaks of rain spreading their way southwards, particularly across East Anglia and the southeast of England. So by the afternoon, some pretty heavy showers possible across the southeast, with some thunder possible here too. But elsewhere though, the further north and the west you go, generally more in the way of sunshine, slightly lighter winds as well. So in that sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm. We're looking at highs of 17 to 20 degrees there, which is slightly above where we should be for this time of the year. And it's more of the same as we head into Saturday. High pressure still dominating across most of the country. Still a few showers across the southeast, but elsewhere largely dry. Some cloud around at times, but that cloud will break to give some spells of sunshine. So staying largely settled as we head into Sunday, into the start of next week, with some sunshine. Temperatures rising, 23 degrees there possible in the south.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers. I agree. And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Can I just caveat the next 2 chats, because something quite weird's happened in the booking process. I'm actually going to be speaking to 2 different Scarlett Maguires. So we're going to have a chat with Scarlett Maguire 1 about polling, because there's been some interesting polling since the campaign started. And then in just a moment, I'm going to be discussing Labour with a different Scarlett Maguire. So don't be confused. I'm not naming 2 guests with one name. They're actually both called Scarlett Maguire. Who knew? It must be a GB News first. So just to run you through the latest polling, we've got Savanta saying that Labour are 17 percentage points ahead of the Tories. Scarlett Maguire, who represents JL Partners, has actually come out with a poll suggesting that they're just 12 points ahead. So we'll discuss that in just a moment. We've also got some personal polling. Starmer's considered more honest, trustworthy, genuine, strong, likeable and intelligent. Sunak is apparently seen as more arrogant and dangerous. Starmer is ahead on questions such as, who is more likely to repay you after borrowing money and win I'm a Celeb? For what it's worth, Starmer's also ahead on, who would you prefer to change a tyre? Would we call on Starmer or Sunak to perform that function? I'm not so sure. So, as explained, joining us now is Scarlett Maguire, 1, Director at JL Partners. Scarlett, lovely. And I know you know the other Scarlett.
Yeah, we were just at dinner.
That's very cosy. Wonderful. So, look, how did you come up with that JL Partners poll, which suggested that Labour were just 12 points ahead? I mean, that's staggering, because some of the other polling, this is why polling confuses me, some of the other polling has put Labour at 27 points ahead. That's a massive gulf and gap.
Yes, absolutely. So we're at the opposite end of that. You quite rightly said we're at 12 points. It's important to say we've been using the same methods as we've consistently used over the last 3 months. We're now going to be updating that weekly now that the campaign has started. We do something quite different to YouGov, and that's part of the reason why we get quite a different answer. So whereas YouGov leave don't know, so people who tell pollsters at the moment they don't currently know how they vote, YouGov leaves them be at the moment and says that's fine. What we do is we try and work out how they will likely break. So who will return to the Conservative Conservatives, who will break for Labour and who will remain not voting at the time of an election. That tends to squeeze things in the Conservatives' favour because there are more Conservative don't knows for them to win back. And actually, we did see in the underlying data, so not just that 12-point lead, that Rishi Sunak was starting to be seen more favourably by Conservative 2019 voters, and that he was increasing his lead with the over 65s. Now, increasing his lead with the over 65s is very important, not just because it's his base, but because they're much more likely to turn out and vote than younger voters, so their votes sort of count for more.
But is that why we've had this kind of over 65s offering, you know, talking about quadruple locks on pensions, talking about bring back national service, not a great appeal to the 18 to 24-year-olds. Maybe the Tories think they've lost them already.
It looks to me like the Tories are conducting a very defensive strategy. So at the moment, they're holding on to less than 50% of their base from 2019 of the people who voted for them. That is obviously not a great place to be in when you're fighting an election campaign. So what I think they're trying to do is to shore up that base, to think, OK, we're not going to get back the people who have switched from Conservative to Labour. We're very unlikely to win over people who voted Labour last time. So what we need to do is to focus on those who've switched to Reform and those who are currently saying don't know. Those voters tend to be older, they tend to be more socially right-wing, and they're fans of the quadruple pension lock and they're fans of the National Service.
I see that the Farage factor may have resulted in Reform going down from 11% to 9%.
Yeah, so this is a trend that is starting to pick up. Actually, most pollsters are showing this at the moment, that there is a dip in Reform. Now, we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of weeks, but I do think it looks like Reform may have peaked. I think it could have been quite a different story had Nigel Farage made a different announcement a few days ago. But as it stands, I think it looks like Reform are going to suffer, especially as the question's going to increasingly become a choice between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. And now, if you are one of those voters that have switched from the Conservative to Reform, they are disproportionately Conservative voters. And I think a few of them will probably think, OK, looking at the choice, the forced choice between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, I'm going to back Rishi Sunak after all.
But when you talk about these don't knows, the so-called undecideds, and maybe we can call them the disgruntled, the assumption seems to be that they will go back to the Tories. Is there evidence that some of them, a lot of them, I don't know whether it's a majority or minority, are considering going with Labour, like in a kind of Blair 1997 way?
I think some of these undecided voters will end up breaking for Labour. In one way, is one of the biggest sort of known unknowns that I think a lot of pollsters are trying to get their head around at the moment is how many might stay at home and not vote at all. So one of the biggest questions we're trying to look at coming up to this election is how to predict turnout, how to work out who's going to come and vote, how to work out which voters who voted before, who normally vote in elections, might not come out and vote. And that will change your answer as well.
And then literally in 10 seconds, Scarlett, the Greens polling ahead of the Tories in the under 50 bracket.
Yes, well, I mean, I think this is because the Conservatives are doing atrociously with the under 50. So currently less than 1 in 10 people, or around 1 in 10, depending where you look, under 50 say they're going to vote Conservative. I think it's more a sign of that than the Greens doing especially well.
Hence why they're targeting the oldies.
They want to shore up the oldies to make sure they come out because they think not many other people will.
Scarlett Maguire 1. Thank you very much. In just a moment, we're going to be speaking to Scarlett Maguire 2, who was a former advisor to Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown, because we want her take on what's happening within Labour. Is Labour eating itself to death? Stay tuned.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The
People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Angela, it's been a busy old time for the Royals.
It has been a very busy old time. I thought I would start with Prince William. He was doing the third of the 3 garden parties that were going on, and it was pouring with rain. For the King Charles, it was beautifully sunny. This was pouring with rain, and you think it would be very sad he's not with his wife. I thought he did a brilliant job because he got all his cousins together. They all dressed up absolutely beautifully, and they were very keen to be friendly and chatting. They even were chatting round to everyone. It doesn't mean they're going to have an important place within the royal family when he takes over, but it was just very nice. And Zara, I thought, looked stunningly beautiful with a pink hat, white dress with pink buttons on. She looked absolutely lovely. And she and Beatrice looked dumb. absolutely gorgeous. And I thought that these two are very happily married and they're blossoming and they look wonderful. So it was very nice. It was very good. And it saved him from looking to be all alone.
He hides it really well and he does his role nicely. Now, what about the awful trolling that Catherine's been receiving?
Yes, 9 million women have cancer a year. Nearly all of them carry on going to work, but she doesn't. You know, she's taking advantage of her position. Well, he doesn't know how ill she is. She doesn't know what sort of medication she's having. I thought it was so spiteful. And actually, what was worth seeing this terrible painting in Tatler that made her, you know, look nothing like her. And it was a bit like a sort of spinster headmistress.
Wouldn't that have been a nice... That picture was meant to be a nice picture of her.
It was absolutely terrible. It looked nothing like her. You know, it's not a time when you want to see a picture and think, oh, my goodness, is this what people look nice?
The People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camilla Tominey. Second Scarlett Maguire joins me in the studio now, former Labour Party advisor to both Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. Now, Scarlett, the Diane Abbott situation, let's just summarise it as this. She's vowing to stand in Hackney North. We still don't know whether she's going to stand for Labour, having had the whip removed and then restored, or as an independent. She's basically saying, I'm going to stand come what may. We've got Starmer saying, oh, we're still deciding what's going on. And we've got his deputy, Angela Rayner, saying, oh, I think she should be allowed to stand, along with a load of other Tory MPs, including Jess Phillips and all the rest of it. This is a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a mess. It's been really, really badly done because actually it should have been... They've had months to do it.
Yes.
And people feel very, very strongly that Diane Abbott needs to be recognised as what she is. I mean, you cannot have Keir Starmer saying, you know, she was an amazing trailblazer, which he says quite rightly, and then say, I don't know whether she's going to stand or not. So the National Executive Committee will decide, and all of this noise that's going on is to try and persuade the National Executive Committee one way or the other. I think that actually it is such a mess that the National Executive Committee do understand that if they stop her from standing, it will be very, very, very bad. And I think, but I don't know. I don't know anything.
There's a tug of war going on with Starmer saying, no, I need to appear moderate. I've got to purge the party of the Corbynistas. And an argument that he's personally having with the executive, because the executive is saying, but I'm sorry, this is backfiring on you badly. And now... No, everyone's talking about your links to Corbyn now because they're reminded of it by Diane Abbott herself, and nobody's talking about your plan for the NHS, your plan for the economy, or anything else.
Well, that's why this has got to be got over with, and we've just got to have Diane come back in as a candidate fighting for the Labour Party, and of course the last thing we want is to have an argument about Diane Abbott instead of, as you say, actually talking about what would happen when Labour got in, if Labour gets into government.
You've got a problem with party unity on the right. You've got a problem with party unity on the left. I mean, does broad church politics work? This is going to be a perennial problem for Starmer, isn't it? If he wins power, there's lots of different chatter going on in Westminster about the size of the majority. And if it's a small one, he's going to have to really pay notice of the harder left elements within Labour. If it's a bigger majority, then maybe he can just do his own thing.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important to have a broad church because actually... Labour and, frankly, the Tories have always had internal arguments, and I think they're very, very healthy. That you say, you know, I mean, one of the obvious is about university fees is should it have been a graduate tax or a fee. I mean, I think Labour went the wrong way, but actually there was an argument. I think you've got to be allowed to have debates within parties. I think it's a shame when it's just factional and it's not people saying, well, what is the best way? I mean, I think we need more pragmatism, but I'm not worried. I mean, frankly, the left of the party, I don't think they're a danger. They want Labour in. What everybody in Labour is desperate for is a Labour government so that you can make a difference. Look, I mean, you can have, as Jeremy Corbyn pointed out, you can have incredibly socialist policies, right? But if you don't get in, you don't actually improve life for anybody.
Although briefly, really briefly, because we've got to bring in Tom to tell us what's on State of the Nation in just a moment, Blair never purged.
No.
He was cleverer than this.
I think purging is completely unnecessary. I think that what you do is you accept broad churches and then you have the debates.
By the way, how influential do you think Tony Blair is on Starmer's administration?
It's sort of yes and no. I think they talk to him quite a lot, but I mean, what we can't do is to fight the last war because we've got a very different one. So
you've got Peter Mandelson quite close there now. You've got the Tony Blair Institute sort of coming out with policies that seem to be adopted. I mean, do you think Blair could have a role in the writing of the manifesto, even if it's a few stages removed?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the manifesto is mostly written by now. Yes.
Which is odd, because whenever you ask Labour for any of its plans, they say, we don't know because we haven't written the manifesto
No,
yet.
but I think that's...
writing it for weeks.
I think that's quite right. But, I mean, obviously, many people thought there might be a May election. So Labour was ready for May.
OK.
On that point, you and I know lots of think tanks in Westminster. Lots of them have, 20 people who work for them. The Tony Blair Institute has over 100, getting nearer to the 200 mark. Lots of these people have been taken on in the last few months and indeed the last year. Many expect to be special advisors within the next government. It might be less that they write the manifesto and more that they staff the next government. Very interesting stuff there. But on the programme coming up at State of the Nation, we're going to be exploring two attack lines that have been developed between the Labour Party and the Tory Party. One side is saying that there are 70 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments. The other side is saying there are almost £200 billion of unfunded spending commitments. Do you know what? They're both telling porkies, and we've got the facts to prove it. So we'll be diving into those numbers.
Looking forward to that. Stay tuned for State of the Nation. You're going to find me here on Sunday. But first, here's the weather with Mark Wilson.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, mixed fortunes in our weather as we head through Friday. Best of the dry, fine weather towards the north and the west, but more cloud across eastern England with some showers and still feeling warm though in that sunshine. If we look at the pressure pattern then, you can see this area of high pressure. It's trying to build in across the UK, so settling things down towards the north and the west. But further east, close to that area of low pressure, more cloud and some rain here. So through Thursday and evening and overnight, we do hang on to more cloud down the eastern parts of England, like I said, with some further showery outbreaks of rain spreading their way southwards and some quite brisk winds here once again. Further towards the north and the west though, drier, clearer and not too cold overnight, so we hang on to still that breeze. So temperatures not dropping below 10 to 12 degrees in towns and cities. As we start Friday morning then, we get off to a pretty fine start across parts of Wales and southwest England. Some cloud around to start the morning, but also some sunshine. But then we run into that thicker cloud across central and eastern parts of England with some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Lincolnshire, East Anglia, southeast England through the morning. So quite a wet start to the day here. But a fine picture across Northern Ireland, much of Northern England and Scotland. Lots of sunshine to start the day, just a few showers across the very far north and the west of Scotland. And it's more of the same really as we head through the rest of Friday. Always the thickest of the clouds across central and eastern parts of England, with further shower outbreaks of rain spreading their way southwards, particularly across East Anglia and the southeast of England. So by the afternoon, some pretty heavy showers possible across the southeast, with some thunder possible here too. But elsewhere though, the further north and the west you go, generally more in the way of sunshine, slightly lighter winds as well. So in that sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm. We're looking at highs of 17 to 20 degrees there, which is slightly above where we should be for this time of the year. And it's more of the same as we head into Saturday. High pressure still dominating across most of the country. Still a few showers across the southeast, but elsewhere largely dry. Some cloud around at times, but that cloud will break to give some spells of sunshine. So staying largely settled as we head into Sunday, into the start of next week, with some sunshine. Temperatures rising, 23 degrees there possible in the south.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh, dear.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting.
I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tom Harwood, Deputy Political Editor of GB News, bringing you State of the Nation's 2024 election coverage. Tonight, first it was Diane Abbott, then Lloyd Russell Moyle, and now Faiza Shaheen, all claimed to have been blocked from being Labour's candidates. Faiza in Chingford, following an inquisition by Labour's National Executive Committee. Are we witnessing